welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today, as the last video of the year, we're gonna do a year in review of all my sewing things. I have lots of fun stats for you guys, as well as some of my thoughts on favorite projects, least favorite projects, and things like that. And then my next video will be my upcoming plans for next year. So this one is very reflection oriented. Basically, I'm gonna be talking about like the yardage I used, cost, hours, just a whole tons of things. I also took like overall just a ton of stats throughout this year. I kept a running spreadsheet. This is the first year I have a complete year of stats. So next year we'll be comparing these stats to those stats and things like that. So it should be a good fun time. This is definitely here if you're very data nerdy like myself, and hopefully will encourage you to start sewing next year. I thought it would be good to start with just my favorite projects. I was initially gonna do a top 3 favorites, but honestly last year was a stellar year of sewing. I'm really proud of a lot of projects, so I had to expand it to 5, and I actually almost had a hard time choosing my least favorite project. Definitely a really positive year. For kind of a ranking of my top 5, I would say number 5 of that was my rainbow overalls. Those have always been a dream. I get lots of compliments when I wear them. They were really interesting to construct. I learned a lot about embroidery techniques on the sewing machine. It was a challenging project, but I think it was really worth it. I think this is probably like my most everyday wear piece too that I made that like ranks in my favorite, just because I sew a lot of impractical pieces. I do have favorites that are practical like these. My 4th favorite would be the coat I made last year using a Gertie pattern. I really love this coat. I like wearing this coat. I have plans to make another one of these coats. I'm just looking for the exact perfect wool. I guess it's helpful if you see on the internet, I'm looking for like a dark wool that has a bunch of rainbow flecks in it. I found one perfectly on Etsy and it slipped out of my hands. I like had it in my cart. My rule generally is that it needs to wait for a few days and somebody else bought it, and that's the only time I've actually felt pretty sad about that. Usually I'm pretty good about being like, that's okay. It means it wasn't meant for me, but I do think I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to find speckled wool after that. So yeah, if you see a coating level wool that's a darker color with a bunch of colorful specks in it, comment down below, send it my way. I would really like to know, because I would really like to make that coat in a like just more neutral color. My third favorite was the Cupid shirt I made. I made this using an upcycled linen that was likely from like the 30s or 40s, and I was so nervous about this project and it turned out really great. It's really comfortable. I love wearing it and I feel absolutely beautiful in the garment, and again, it's a very practical everyday type of garment. And I also wasn't sure about like using something that old and having it be made with 70s pattern, so that made me a little nervous too, but it turned out really great. My 4th favorite was the first linen dress I made. I could probably put both like linen centric projects that I made on this, but I'm particularly proud of the linen dress because it was my first time trying it, and I think it ended up really successful, and all the time and dedication was well worth it. That puts my favorite. I'm wearing my favorite. My favorite is this beautiful 1930s gown I made with silk I picked up in Rome a couple years ago. I think this turned out stunning. Every time I wear it, I feel like a goddess. This is admittedly more of a summer dress. To wear this right now, I am having the heat blast in my space because it is way too cold, and also it is not a bra-worthy dress, so I have to be warm. But I really love this dress. Every time I put it on, I just feel like the most myself I can, and that's what good clothing does. Clothing should always just make you feel really good about yourself and really good in your body, and when you can make a piece that you feel so like this in, it's just absolutely perfection. And I think this year I made a lot of garments that really helped me feel like myself. Hi, baby. Oh, down you go. Sorry. Slippery silk. The least favorite thing I made this year, I had a really hard time actually selecting this because I feel like most of my projects were successful. So my least favorite was actually the swimsuit top I made. Something I just like kind of warped in the fabric, and out of all the swimsuit tops I've made over the years, it's my least favorite swimsuit top, so I thought that put that neatly into this category. Now we're gonna go into some like overall stats. This year, one of my goals was to sew or destash as much yardage as I brought in, so I got to like an even 0 number. I bought 258 yards of fabric, which is just way too much. I think next year I'm going to try to really bring that number down. And then my yardage used and destashed is 253 and 1/5. I don't know quite how that works, but it was 1/5. So that means that I brought in about 5 more yards than I used or destashed, which all things considered, I actually feel pretty good about that. It's not quite my goal, which was hopefully 0. Instead, I'm at 5. 5 yards is way closer than like 50 or 60, you know? So I think next year will be great for striving towards that goal. I've been working on picking up high quality fabrics and only picking up fabrics when I have a project that I can kind of like instantly come to mind with it. And I'm hoping to continue to reduce my consumerism by doing that. My total hours sewn. So I tracked every single hour I sewed last year, 461 hours and 45 minutes, which is essentially 19 days. I guess this is not surprising given I was able to take 4 weeks off this year that I took off basically to sew. 19 days is what, 2.5 weeks? And then I sew both days almost every single weekend, sometimes during weeknights. I sew a lot. Sewing for me is just like it's both a great creative process for me, but it's also a very meditative and like mentally healthy process for me. And honestly, this last year has just been kind of hard emotionally. So I think that's how I ended up sewing that amount of hours. That feels a little bit insane. Part of me wants to say I would like to sew less next year, but I don't think that's realistically going to happen. Although I did notice this back half of the year, I am significantly faster than I once was. So I think it'll be interesting to compare this next year. This like feels embarrassing to share, but I think it's really helpful to be transparent on like how it's kind of expensive to sew as much as I do. You can definitely do cheaper. I mean, I do buy some really expensive fabrics. I'm really transparent about that in my cost breakdown. It's really important to me to be transparent, which is why even though I'm uncomfortable with sharing my total spent sewing projects this year, I am going to share it with you anyway. I spent $4,375.66 sewing this year. What, that's like 2 months of rent for me, 3. So that's a lot of money. It gives me enough joy, and honestly, I don't buy clothes anymore. I pretty much only buy like underwear and socks now. So basically my sewing budget is like my craft budget and my wardrobe budget, which is still just like a lot of money. And like I said, I feel uncomfortable sharing this with you, especially as I am keenly aware of what's going on economically. But I make a promise to this channel to be really transparent, and part of that is sometimes I feel really, really privileged, and I feel like awkward, I guess, about that privilege. We're gonna continue kind of on that theme. I wrote down the 3 most expensive projects I made and the 3 least expensive projects I made, because I think it's really important to highlight you can make beautiful things without spending a ton of money, but I also think it's important to talk about things that did cost a lot of money to make. I just think that we could really all use being more financially transparent with each other, and ultimately being financially transparent only helps the working class and hurts the like rich oligarch class. My 3rd most expensive project is my spiderweb silk dress that I made. So this counts the expense for both the overskirt and the dress. If I was to separate those out, it would be significantly less expensive. When you think about it, so I spent $296.10. Considering the fact that I used silk taffeta and the fact that I think this dress and overskirt was over 10 yards, I think it was like around 12 yards of fabric usage. That just like makes sense. 12 yards of fabric is going to be expensive, especially silk. And I really, really love how that dress turned out, and I really loved that silk that I used. So I'm more than like happy, I guess, with that cost. I feel like it was reasonable. 2nd most expensive is the dress I'm wearing, which is the Rome silk dress. I think to date, nope, I have 1 fabric that is more expensive than this fabric. I only have 1 fabric that is more expensive per yard than this. So it's not surprising that this, even though it used, I think, 4.5 yards, it's not super shocking that this dress was my 2nd most expensive that I made. And then the most expensive dress I made, which is really interesting, and I actually think this might be less true depending on where you live, was that linens dress that I mentioned. I spent $306.18 on that dress. So one of those reasons is you can't really find those linens in the thrift stores here in Seattle. So you have to buy them at an antique mall, which is much more expensive. However, when I've thrifted places like Pennsylvania or Virginia, I have definitely noticed you can find a lot more of these pieces out of thrift store for a pretty low price. So you could definitely make this dress for cheaper. And also at the end, I kind of got in a rush to just have enough linens to make the dress, which meant I spent more money on items than I maybe would have, if that makes sense. So I think you can really make a dress upcycled like this cheaper than I did. I don't think it needed to be this expensive, but just based on the location of where I live, it was more expensive. For the least expensive projects that I made, the third least expensive is the kind of teal flowery rayon blouse that I just showed in my sewing pile video last week. This is because this fabric I was able to buy per pound, so it was like $1.63. The pattern itself was also pretty cheap, so I was able to make this for $15.98, which it's a beautiful piece, much higher quality than anything fast fashion, and costs around what fast fashion costs. So you can sew beautiful things on a budget. I do want to emphasize that, as well as like being honest about when I've made things more expensive. Like all the things that I've made that are more expensive aren't practical everyday pieces that I can wear as often. Actually, I do wear the patchwork dress a lot, but the other two are gowns, right? So if you're not regularly sewing gowns, you can get things down to like a fast fashion price. The gray speckled skirt that I also just showed in that video was, actually my third. The teal was second cheapest. The gray skirt was third cheapest, $16.90. And it's a Foley wool piece. It's that I was able to pick that up for $2 a yard at a Recreative reuse center. So if you can find your fabric secondhand, it's just going to be a lot cheaper because all of these are secondhand fabrics. The cheapest item that I made was the hunting skirt I made. It was again in a like me not sewing on camera video, which was $14.77. One of the keys of that is honestly the fabric for that was free. It was given to me by a friend or in a fabric exchange. I can't quite remember, but I didn't pay for the fabric, and that's super key. Not only did I not pay for the fabric, I also didn't pay for a pattern because I was just using a gathered skirt pattern I have up here. Basically, all I had to pay for was notions and the accent fabric, so that's why it was as cheap as it was. But once people know you sew, often they'll offload fabric on you from like their grandmas or whatever, so make sure everybody knows you sew. You'll get lots of fun free stuff. So I also calculated the things that took the most time. The thing that took the third amount highest time, which took me 19 hours and 45 minutes, was my Pride shimmer dress. I love that dress. I think I'm gonna wear it for Christmas this year actually because it feels like holiday enough for Tinsley. I've been trying to think, I don't actually really like making Christmas dresses because I'm like not a huge Christmas person. Like I don't like the colors. I'm not religious. I'm not a huge Christmas person. So I really like the idea of using like my Tinsley Pride dress as a holiday dress as well. So we get two uses for it, and honestly, it's a warmer dress, so using it in the winter is probably a good thing. This is on the top of all my lists. Number 2, to no one's surprise, is that linens dress again. So I spent 26 hours and 45 minutes on that. For the winter, which was also in my favorites, it is funny how things that I spend the most time on are often in my favorites, is the coat. The coat took me 27 hours and 15 minutes to make. Coats just take a long time. I think I could make it a lot quicker now that I've done it once, but it was such a learning process. That feels like ages ago, but it was this year, and that was just the one that took the most time, and honestly, I get a ton of use out of it. So the things that I made the fastest, for kind of technically second because we have a tie for first, but second was the bow tie top I showed in last video. It only took me 4 hours to make. It's actually one of my favorite pieces that I've added to my wardrobe like off camera, and I mean, I love almost everything I sewed last year, but I do like specifically very much love that piece. And then I also we have a tie also from last video, which was the speckled skirt and the blue plaid skirt. Both of those took me 3 hours, which is not surprising. It's essentially 2 seams and a waistband. I did add a pocket, and it added probably like an extra half hour to add a pocket in. That is the least time. So I thought it would be fun to average things out. So to average things out, I have to give you the number of total items made. I made 53 projects this year, which means I was making a project a week plus a very, very fractional, smaller, bigger. Ignore me. I'm just poor mathing over here. I think I would like to not go any higher than this number on any given year. Adding 53 pieces to your wardrobe is generally unreasonable. I talk about it all this time, but I just struggle with my overall attraction to consumption on this. Like, I talk about it a lot on this channel, but it's hard because there's a need in me to create, and I know I'm creating really high quality pieces, but I also know that like the world doesn't need more clothes, so it will just always be a conflict in me. But right now, sewing is one of the things in my life that makes me the most happy, so I'm going to continue to do that. I don't think, probably even just for my own sanity, and so I'm socializing enough and taking breaks enough that going over 53 items in a year is a good idea. We'll get to compare these stats next year, which will be fun because this is the first year I really have all these like hardcore stats. So the average time per item was 9 hours and 15 minutes. That kind of makes sense in my opinion, just considering like I have stuff that was as high as 29 and stuff is 3. 9 hours and 15 minutes feels like it makes sense. And my average cost was $84.15, which when you think about like what a dress at Zara or places like that cost, and those are like not made out of nice materials, and everything I made is for the most part, I feel like that's a pretty good cost per item. I definitely think next year, I don't know if my goal is to like lower cost per item. I don't know. I have some different things I'm thinking about that I'll talk in my next video. And the last thing we have is I have like different percentages. I'm going to be popping some charts here, but I did a breakdown of things by decade, whether I filmed them or not, like what I made, like skirt, dress, whatever. Color, what was like my most popular color. I'm just going to read the top 3 and maybe the bottom one, and you can see the chart here. For the count, like the decade count, to nobody's surprise, probably. Actually, I was a little surprised. I expected to be more 1940s focused, but actually 1950s was my number 1 decade. I did 38.5% 1950s clothing, and yeah, I think that's really interesting because I would have guessed 40s, but I think it's because with 1950s is usually how I make my separates. I really like the 1950s blouses and skirts. So I guess it's not, in retrospect, that surprising, but like initially I was a little surprised by that number. And then we have a tie for the second most made decade between the 70s and the 40s of about 21%. That's not surprising to me because the 70s, the 40s, and the 30s really closely mimic each other, and 30s patterns are so expensive that getting 70s patterns that are inspired by 30s fashion is a lot easier. The other 3 decades that ranked was modern, 1960s, and 1930s. I don't like the 20s, so that's not shocking. Modern, it's kind of weird because the one modern pattern was a folkwear pattern about Elizabethan era, so I don't quite know. Actually, let me know down below, how do you think I should count like a reproduction pattern that uses modern sewing techniques? Because I made it because it looks Elizabethan. However, it's technically a modern pattern. So let me know. As far as filming, my goal was to equally do projects off camera as I do on camera. This is just because, like, honestly, like, I love taking you all along with me. However, moving cameras around, thinking of angles, thinking of how I'm going to make this project make sense to you takes time. So my goal was to sew as much off camera as I did on. I got pretty close. I did 57% on camera and 42% off camera. So pretty damn close. I am not upset with that. That feels really, really close to my goal. And honestly, with like the fact I don't also want to make so many pieces, that might not be realistic to have that big of a goal of stuff I sew off camera. So for like type of garment I'm making, to nobody's surprise, dresses are what I make the most of. I also wear the most dresses. I love just being able to put something on in the morning and basically have a full outfit put together. 40% dresses, and then my second was shirts, which was 21%. This is also not super surprising. And then next up was skirts, which makes sense because I need to make something to wear with those shirts. And I feel like skirts are weirdly like more of a core item. Like I make most of my skirts more neutral and my shirts more like special. So that all makes sense to me. Colors. I expected to be way more all over the place with colors. I stayed pretty tight in the blue, pink, and purple realm. That's not shocking. I mean, look at me right now. And most of my favorite projects were blue, pink, or purple. So that's just my color story. That's what I like. I did do, other than that, like neutrals, I will say warms. I mean, pink is technically a warm tone, but warms like orange, red, and yellow are just not colors I often wear. So those aren't super represented in this. Stash versus new. My goal was just to make sure I was sewing through my stash, and I think I accomplished that because I sewed almost 57% out of stash and 43% new. I'm going to talk more about this ratio next video because I think this year of sewing has kind of shifted my goals around what I'm using out of my stash versus what I'm buying brand new. So I'll talk about that then. And then for like the type of fabric I'm using, not surprising, highest percentage is cotton. That's because cotton is is the cheapest available natural fiber. I really like cotton and I try to sew mostly natural. Polyester, I sewed, it was my second at 25%. My ideal world would probably be no polyester. However, there's just some pieces that's not super practical for, but definitely next year I would like to have the amount of polyester I'm sewing like below 10%. However, a lot of this poly, like one of my rules with polyester is it has to be pretty much secondhand unless it's like a special occasion piece. Most of the polyester that I acquired was secondhand or was through like shops that have been around for a couple decades, and that polyester's probably been sitting there that long. So I don't really want to be bringing a ton of new plastic into the world or supporting oil fields or any of that. So definitely hoping to have less there. I know this was long. I hope you enjoyed it. That basically wraps up this video. What I should have done, oh no, I forgot. Actually, scrap that. I'm gonna be right back. We're not gonna outro this. I meant to break down how much I got paid per hour, which is gonna be really freaking depressing, but we're gonna do it. So I will be right back. And I'm back. So let me grab, I have a new spreadsheet. We have construction trucks going by, you know. So I did a bunch of money math in the like half hour that it took me, because I want to be clear, this is not a like poor me, I don't make enough money off YouTube thing. I just think it's really helpful for me to be completely transparent with you on what I make off of YouTube, to show you why small creators are constantly pushing their Patreons, or not even small, all creators, is because of how little we get paid. So I just think this is helpful. I will also be like launching Patreon/Ko-Fi monthly memberships. Ko-Fi is going to be a little bit cheaper because they don't take fees. Patreon will be proportionally more expensive to the fees that they collect. I will not be doing YouTube memberships because YouTube takes 30%, which is absolutely egregious, and I'm not doing that. As far as money I made off of YouTube ad money / super thanks, I made $2,884.54. That sounds like a lot of money, right? We're gonna get further into the breakdown and discuss why it's not. Ko-Fi money, which thank you. If you are anyone who ever gave me money on Ko-Fi, it makes my day. It makes me feel so supported and validated. It helps keep this channel like more financially realistic for me. Again, please never give me your money if you are struggling. I am not struggling. So if you are struggling, do not give me your money, please. I leave it as an option for people who have the ability to financially support, because as you'll see, I'm not getting paid properly for my labor, and I talk a lot about paying people properly for their labor on this channel. So when I add those two up total, I don't know if I already mentioned this, Ko-Fi is $931. I made $3,815.54 this year off of my YouTube content. I'm not going to count in like when I sell clothes online into that, because large majority of people buying have nothing to do with YouTube, and it's really how I keep stuff out of the landfill. It's not so much about making money. Now let's compare this to our hours. So just on sewing, as we've previously discussed, I spent 461 hours and 45 minutes on sewing. For editing, I took the number of videos this year that I put out, which I'm pretty sure is 56. It might be 58, but we're going 56. I multiplied that by 4 hours, which is about, I would say on average, what it takes me to edit a video. I think I might track this time next year so I can give you an actual accurate breakdown without misleading you in any way, shape, or form, I guess. So that means that I put in 685 hours and 45 minutes into this channel last year. That sounds about right. I mean, I think most of you know this. I have a full-time job. I work 40 hours a week. So this is often what I'm doing on my weekends and my evenings, and it's because I enjoy it. The second I don't enjoy YouTube, I'm out. It doesn't pay enough. Let's also mention again that I spent $4,375.66 on the supplies for sewing. With that, all those like totals and things, my hourly rate, if you don't count the fact I bought any supplies, was $5.56. Not even hitting minimum wage here, right? And my hourly rate, once you calculate in those supply costs, it means I'm losing 82 cents an hour for producing content for you guys on YouTube. Again, I don't say this for you to take pity on me. I just want you to understand where creators are coming from when they're talking about like, please support me financially on Patreon. Is you're likely watching this content for free. We're not making great money. Like, unless you are big enough to be getting sponsorships and are also okay with sponsorships. Like, I personally don't know how many sponsorships I'll actually be okay taking, because I have really, really high ethical standards. This is no diss on anyone who takes sponsorships. I just know that they're not realistic for myself. Also, that's why creators take sponsorships. If you're annoyed at them taking sponsorships, contribute to their Patreon so they don't have to. Because like, again, I don't do this for a living. For this to pay what my actual job pays, I would have to probably have millions of followers, as well as be ethically willing to take on sponsorship deals that I am not. The money in the financial space of a content creator is hard. It is really tough to make it as a content creator, and it's why, like, I get annoyed when people are really, like, dissy on influencers or people who take sponsorships, is because if this is your main form of income, I don't know how you do it. And I have mad respect for people who do, because it's so uncertain. At any point in time, you can get penalized in 6,000 different ways. And also, like, I haven't paid taxes on this money yet, right? Like, most likely this is going to be taxed. Luckily, here we don't have an income tax in Washington, so this will probably only be taxed at about, like, a 22 to 30% rate from the federal government, but, like, it will be taxed. It's expensive. It is expensive to be a content creator. It's why you see so many white, thin, privileged people on here. I say that as a white, thin, privileged person on here. I could not do this without the fact that I work in tech for my day job. Also, I thought it would be helpful to give you, actually, I did better on average this year on what I make per video. I make $51 about per video. However, I want to be clear, like, that is not what I'm making per video. Most videos are staying in the $20 to $40 range because I have some power videos. So I thought I would just highlight, like, the biggest money makers in the last year for me. It's actually fun because these have tied into, like, my favorite projects. The linen dress that has come up 6,000 times in this video is my number one moneymaker this year, making me $188.24. If you remember when we went through the costs, that is still $100 less than it cost me to make it, and again, doesn't account for any sort of the time I put into it. For the second ranking, I didn't even put out this video this year, but the glitter tulle daisy gown that I made last year or the year before is my second biggest moneymaker at $152.35. And then the last one is another one that I didn't even make this year, I made last year, which was the walkaway dress for that challenge. That challenge, I've said this to Stephanie, huge thank you to Stephanie for putting together that challenge. I know that challenge made a lot of money for a lot of creators because it linked us all together. So that was actually a really important project for me financially this year, which is so funny because I was so reluctant to do it because I didn't want to make a garment I won't use. And it is a garment that I wear, and it has been something that's made me money so I can do other projects. So sometimes you just have to think about that when you're a content creator. But hopefully this was not too, like, we're just so raised to be financially uncomfortable in the US, like discussing finances. So hopefully this wasn't like TMI or came across really obnoxious. I just want to be like really honest with you guys, and I want to give you guys context for why content creators are constantly asking for that Ko-Fi and for that Patreon, because I think sometimes people think influencers are being greedy, and we're not being greedy. Most of us are barely scraping by to even just like my only goal for this channel is to break even. I want what I'm spending on specifically sewing supplies. I'm not asking you guys to fund my wardrobe, especially when I buy like gunny sacks. That's bizarre. But I would love for all my sewing costs to start to be covered. And in these costs, I didn't add in electricity, the space for my content, all my cameras, all like it's so expensive, and it's why again you see so many privileged people in this space. So hopefully, yeah, sorry. I feel ranty, and I didn't really want to end this on a ranty note. Huge, huge, huge thank you from me this year for all your support. This has been the best year on YouTube to date for me. I have met even more amazing people. I love hearing from you guys. I felt very, very happy with the growth of my channel. I'm growing at exactly the speed I want, which is a little bit slow to other people, but exactly how I want to grow, which is a community that I feel like actually engages with me. And I have a really high engagement rate on my channel, and I have you guys to thank for that. Definitely stay tuned for what's to come in the new year with the launch of my Patreon and Ko-Fi memberships. This will be me asking for money again next year because now you know why. -82 cents an hour. So enjoy your holidays, whether you celebrate them, whether you don't. Take some time for yourself. Take care of yourself. Let's get back together in the new year. I'll talk about some really exciting goals I have, launch my Patreon, and we'll do the dang thing next year. So I will see you then. Bye.